Hi, kids. So, I wanted to take a few minutes to go back over our book that we were reading about Mali and if I were born during the time of ancient Mali. I don't know how much of it you're going to remember at this point, so I'll just start from the beginning and I'll do about 15 minutes of this each day between today and next Thursday, so over the next week. So, just as if we were at school and doing cafe time, it would be 15 minutes of this book, 15 minutes of BAT, and then you have that other 30 minutes to read and journal on your own. And then, of course, you should be reading that other 20 minutes a day that you would be doing that during homework time. So I'm going to go ahead and read to you and show you the pictures for just a little bit. If you were me and lived in the height of ancient Mali, you would have been born in the year 1332. This was an important time in Mali. It was when it was considered a vital trade center and a world power. From the year 1230 to around early 1600s, the Mali Empire was also known as Mandingo. The word Mali means hippopotamus in the Mandinkan language. This is the town of Mali today. So, more of a thriving area today, but still more third world than we are here in America. And what that means is, they don't have paved roads and they don't have the luxuries that we have. So being stuck inside right now and not able to go places and do fun things gives us a little more of an idea of what those kiddos in that area probably go through. This is what a city in Mali might have looked like 700 years ago. So mostly made of sand and stone, no cars, animals roaming the streets, and of course it is a desert area. Mali started as a small part of the Kingdom of Ghana, then rebelled against the government and became the kingdom in their own. The Kingdom of Mali emerged as the most powerful in the Western Sudan. And if you remember, the Sudan area is that desert area that we talked about. The Mali Empire grew to extend over a large portion of Western Africa, from the Atlantic Ocean to the southern part of the Sahara Desert. With strong leadership, Mali was able to take control of trade routes, making the economy and the people rich. If you were a girl, your parents might have chosen the name Wassa or Miriam. They might have given the names Dango or Abraham to your brothers. What do the names tell you about the Malian society? And if you remember, we talked about how Miriam and Abraham, which is like Abraham, would have been more biblical names. You lived in the capital, Niamey, and had a major road that ran through it that was as long as it was wide. It was an important road because it was the road to Mecca. Mecca was a special city important to the followers of Islam. Many people in your country embraced the Islam faith. Some still followed the old way, but your grandfather became a Muslim when the king changed his religion. If you remember, that was the time when the king decided that Muslim would become the religion of that country. You knew that your family was part of the Mande people and spoke the language called Mandinka. You lived in a large home made with mud bricks and an adobe plaster, which we talked about that was the mud mixed with animal hairs and hay and things like that to make it a little stronger and to keep the elements out, like the wind and the sand. It had a large wooden log support beam system that jutted out of the walls and out the sides of the house. It had multiple rooms with carved out passageways between them. The earthen walls made the house cool in the hot summer months. We also talked about how these houses would be similar to some of the huts we see at Jamestown that the Indians here in America would have constructed. And so they would look something like this. You shared your house with your father and his 4 wives. There were 17 children between all your father's wives. He always told you that you were his favorite. And if you remember, the kings also had several wives. That was just the way it was in this area and with the way that these people lived back then. And because the more wives you had, that meant the more children you had. And the more children you had, the more work could be done. Plus, if you were a king, it gave you more heirs to your throne. And we talked about how sometimes the stepchildren or the half children, our half brothers and sisters, would take over the throne instead of the natural heir. You had heard that recently the government had ordered many of the palaces to be converted into mosques. Mosques were places for people who followed Islam to go and pray. They built mosques from rice husks, earth, and water. The mud was sun-dried. They were 4 stories high and had 3 minarets, which are tall towers where people are called to pray daily. People loved to go to pray in the beautiful mosques. You knew that if people didn't get to the mosque early on Friday, it would be crowded and hard to find a spot. These 60-foot high towers were topped with ostrich eggs, which were put there for good fortune and fertility. Kind of crazy to think about the things that they thought would bring them luck and good fortune. Mali was a lovely place to live. You enjoyed the dry desert-like weather. The Niger River was nearby and served as a vital source for fresh fish, water, and trades between towns. And remember, we talked about how the Niger River ran right through the middle, and it was really important to the people and is still an important part of Mali today. Your older brother told you about other important places in the Mali Empire that made it special. He went to the great city of Timbuktu, and you guys should remember us talking about that because that was where the universities started for the Mali Empire. Timbuktu was world famous. It had huge universities with enormous libraries containing ancient Greek and Roman books. People traveled there from all over the world. So if you think about that sentence, that's why we went from ancient Rome, ancient Greece to ancient Mali is because, or ancient Greece to Rome to Mali, is because they were all connected. So the Romans took a lot of their ideas from the Greeks, and then the people of Mali took information and ideas from both of those empires. Kangaba was the spiritual capital, which meant that it was an important religious center where people came to feel a kinship with each other. So just like we go to church together to feel kinship, they did the same thing, just their religion was a little different. Your brother described the major trade routes that cut through central Mali, bearing salt from the Sahara Desert into the north and gold from the south. These groups were made up of caravans. There were hundreds of camels loaded for products that people traded for the best resources in Mali, salt from the desert and gold from the mines. Traders brought silk, captured slaves, and many other products from China and Europe. Mali needed the slaves to work in the salt and gold mines. Europe and Asia needed the salt to preserve their meat so that it would taste good and last longer. They needed the gold to create coins for their currency. So all of these countries really needed each other for the things that they traded back and forth. And that's how trade amongst different nations actually started. You weren't sure which were more valuable, the salt or the gold. Either way, you knew your father had a lot of both, which made you wealthy. Both your grandfather and father were important people in the government. Because of this, you lived near the royal palace. The palace was a large compound that served as the king's home and where all the government offices were. There were meeting rooms, guest rooms, servants' quarters, a stable, a cooking area, and that's where the feasts were made for thousands of people. In this palace lived Mansa Musa. Remember, we talked a lot about him. Mansa was another name for king or emperor. Musa was his given name. The name Musa is Moses in Islam. So see another biblical reference with the names. Have you heard of that name before? Yes, we have. Your brother had secretly taken you to see the king's throne on a special day when the leader was holding court. You hid behind a pillar because girls were not supposed to be there. If you remember, we talked about, and this is true through all the ancient cultures, girls, females were considered lesser than the males. There were lots of things they weren't supposed to do or were not allowed to do that boys and men could do. And so being seen in the court was one of those things. You gasped when you saw the mighty king. He looked magnificent in a red velvet tunic and golden skull cap. He sat on the polished black throne. It was high on a rectangular platform at one end of the courtyard. It was carved from ebony and had 2 huge ivory tusks on either side, standing like guards. A servant held a large silk umbrella over the king's head, shading him from the sun. There were 2 servants behind him, fanning him constantly. There were musicians with drums made from stretched out goatskins and gourds of all different sizes. Some men strummed on a kora, which was an instrument that had a long neck and 21 strings. There were several flutes made from millet stalks, bamboo, and gourds. You loved to close your eyes and move to the rhythm. So there's another, am I getting it? Another picture? All right. The king gave orders to his Dali or herald who would shout them out to the crowd. He served as the king's voice as well as a master of ceremonies for court functions and festivals. Behind them, there were horses lined up in case the king wanted to leave. You spotted your father, who stood near the king as a military advisor. He had to give reports often to his leader. The area was filled with hundreds of people waiting to hear what Mansa Musa had to say. In the courtyard, you watched the great king listen to disputes and give out orders. So the king also acted as the judge. It looks like our time is just about up. So I'm going to stop here. And I'll start up again tomorrow with you guys on this. And I hope you're enjoying me reading to you on YouTube. I know it's not the same as having interactive discussions, but I'm enjoying it. And I miss you guys. Love you.